My name is Emily Carter, and I never thought I'd start my story here flat on my back in a sterile, white hospital room, staring at a ceiling I might never see again. The beep of the heart monitor felt almost like a countdown, each tone marking borrowed seconds. My chest felt like it had been cinched tight with steel cables. The nurse's eyes were calm, but urgent, her hands moving quickly to adjust my IV. She didn't have to tell me how bad it was. I could see it in her face. Outside my room, I could hear the muffled sound of hurried footsteps, the low voices of doctors coordinating in a language of clipped urgency. But there was one sound missing, one I had convinced myself I would hear, no matter what the familiar voices of my parents. They weren't there. They weren't on their way. It wasn't because they didn't know. The doctors had called them. They told them my condition was critical, that my lungs were closing, that this night might be my last. But my parents had something else they couldn't postpone. My younger sister had a social engagement, and they'd promised to drive her. That was more important than being at my bedside. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, you know the kind of cold that sinks into your bones when you realize you are not anyone's priority. I'd been carrying that frost for years, always telling myself it would melt someday, that in a real emergency they'd come running. But here I was, gasping for breath, hearing strangers moving heaven and earth to keep me alive, while the people who brought me into this world chose someone else's convenience over my life. I remember thinking, even in that haze of oxygen and medication, so this is it. This is where the truth finally stops pretending. I had no more excuses to make for them. No more fantasies that maybe if I tried harder, I could earn a place in their hearts equal to my sister's. It was in that moment, a moment no one should have to face, that something shifted inside me. It was the first flicker of a decision that would change everything. But I wasn't ready to act on it yet. Not that night. That night was about survival. As the nurse leaned in to check my vitals, she said softly, "Hang in there, Emily. We've got you." And in that simple sentence from a woman I had met less than an hour ago, I felt more care than I had from my family in years. I want you to really think about that, because if you've ever been the one holding your breath, hoping someone will show up for you, I need you to hear this. Your value isn't defined by who does or doesn't walk through the door when you need them most. And before I take you deeper into this story, before I unravel the years that led to this night, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And if you've ever felt like the invisible one in your family, share it in the comments. You'd be surprised how many of us have been there and how much it matters to be heard. This night wasn't the beginning. It was the breaking point. And to understand why, you need to know how the cracks started forming years ago, cracks I spent most of my life trying to seal shut with good grades, perfect behavior, and a smile that hid how cold it was behind my ribs. The truth is, I grew up believing loyalty was a one-way street, that if I loved my family hard enough, if I bent myself into the right shape, they'd eventually turn and meet me halfway. But loyalty without reciprocity isn't loyalty. It's self-erasure. And I had been erasing myself for years. Tonight was different. Tonight, I wasn't just fighting for my breath, I was fighting for the right to stop disappearing. When I tell people about my childhood, they often picture a postcard-perfect home, white shutters, a neatly trimmed lawn, the smell of fresh-baked cookies drifting from the kitchen. And they're not wrong about the picture, but they are wrong about the frame. Because inside that frame, the air was thick with something no one outside could see, a quiet hierarchy that placed me firmly in second place. I was the firstborn, the responsible one. My younger sister Olivia arrived 3 years later and quickly became the sun around which our family orbited. From the moment she learned to walk, the spotlight followed her. My earliest memories are a montage of moments where my achievements slid off the radar, while Olivia's smallest milestones were celebrated like national holidays. I remember the science fair in 4th grade. I'd spent weeks perfecting a solar-powered water purifier, something I was ridiculously proud of. The day I won first place, I burst through the front door, clutching my ribbon like it was Olympic gold. My mom glanced up from helping Olivia draw with sidewalk chalk. "That's nice, honey," she said, before turning back to watch Olivia scribble a lopsided heart on the pavement. It became a pattern I could recite in my sleep. I'd bring home straight A's, and Mom would smile politely, then gush over Olivia's C+ in art because she tried so hard. I'd earn a spot in a state-level swim meet, and Dad would tell me he was proud, but couldn't attend because Olivia had a sniffle and needed him at home. It wasn't that they were cruel. It was that their affection had a gravitational pull, and I simply didn't generate enough force to be caught in its orbit. By the time I hit high school, I'd learned to swallow the sting. I told myself stories to make it make sense. Olivia was younger, needed more attention. I was older, more independent. I repeated those mantras so often I almost believed them. Almost. The truth is, what you excuse long enough becomes invisible. And when it becomes invisible, it becomes normal. My normal was existing in the margins of my own family's story, filling the blank spaces with achievements I hoped they'd notice. It wasn't just emotional neglect, it was also about priorities that revealed themselves in moments that should have been about me. My junior year, I had a severe asthma flare that landed me in the hospital for 3 days. My mom visited once for less than an hour because Olivia had a school talent show. My dad called to check in but admitted he wasn't great with hospitals. Olivia's piano solo was a bigger event. That's the kind of memory that sticks like a shard of glass. You learn to work around it, but it's still there, catching the light when you least expect it. By the time I was an adult, I had internalized my role so deeply that I didn't even question it. I became self-sufficient to the point of exhaustion. Paid my own way through college with 3 part-time jobs, graduated summa cum laude, landed a good job in marketing, all without leaning on my family for a dime. And still, I found myself driving 2 hours home for holidays, arms full of gifts, tailored to each person's tastes, desperate for a hint of reciprocal thoughtfulness. Olivia, meanwhile, bounced from job to job, never lasted more than a few months anywhere. And yet every stumble was met with comfort, new opportunities, even financial bailouts. It was as though her very existence was an accomplishment, while mine had to be constantly proven, and even then it barely registered. And here's where I pause to say, if you've ever been in that role, the dependable one who doesn't need as much, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment about what that's been like for you. You'd be amazed how many of us have lived the same unspoken script. You might think I was bitter, and maybe I should have been. But what I really felt most of the time was this gnawing hope that someday the scales would balance. That someday they'd look at me and see the same worth they saw in Olivia. But hope can be a slow poison. It kept me anchored in a dynamic that chipped away at me year after year. It's easy to think endurance is a strength, that if you can just hang on long enough, you'll be rewarded. But sometimes endurance just means you're standing still while the damage accumulates. I didn't know it yet, but the night in the hospital, the night they didn't come, was the moment that poison finally left my system. All the years of justifying, of waiting, of trying to earn something that should have been freely given, they were about to come to a hard stop. And that's the thing about moments like that, they don't just break you, they strip you down to the truth. And the truth was, I'd been second place in my own family for as long as I could remember. What I didn't realize yet was that the next decision they made, the one that would tip everything from tolerable to unforgivable, was already on the horizon. It would come dressed as something small, something easy to dismiss, but it would cost me more than I ever imagined. There's something uniquely cruel about being sick in a house where your pain is treated like background noise. I'd always been the healthy one, or so they liked to say, mainly because I didn't complain much. But what they didn't realize was that my silence wasn't the absence of pain, it was the absence of an audience willing to listen. I was 26 when the symptoms began. It started with what I thought was seasonal fatigue, sore joints, low-grade fevers that came and went. Then came the chest tightness, a fatigue so deep I felt like I was walking through syrup, and dizzy spells that sent me gripping walls. The diagnosis, autoimmune disease, hit like a punch, but the real blow came later when I saw my family's reaction. Well, Mom said over the phone, her voice light, "At least you don't have anything serious like cancer." I remember staring at the ceiling, the phone pressed to my ear, and thinking, what exactly does it take for them to care? Dad's contribution was even shorter. "You've always been tough. You'll get through it." And just like that, the topic was dropped, replaced by updates about Olivia's new puppy and her stress from starting yet another new job. Meanwhile, my days were a carousel of doctor visits, blood tests, and medications that left my stomach twisted in knots. I'd drag myself to work, run out of breath walking up a single flight of stairs, and collapse on my couch by evening. But every time I tried to talk about it, I could feel the air in the room change, like my words were an inconvenience. The moment that sealed it came one Sunday afternoon. Olivia had a minor cold, just a sniffle, the kind that clears up in 2 days with rest. My mother drove across town with homemade soup, vitamins, and a hot water bottle wrapped in fleece. She posted a smiling photo of them on Facebook with the caption, "Taking care of my baby girl." nothing's more important than family. I was in the ER at that exact moment, hooked to an IV after collapsing in my kitchen from dehydration caused by my medication. I called my mother twice. She didn't pick up. Lying in that hospital bed, I realized I wasn't the sick child. I was the inconvenient one. And in their eyes, inconvenience wasn't something you nurtured, it was something you endured until it went away. For years, I'd told myself their favoritism was just a quirk, not malice. That it didn't mean they didn't love me. But love without care is like a lifeboat without oars. You can call it what you want, but it won't get you anywhere when you're drowning. The saddest part, I still wanted them to notice. Even in that ER room with my hands cold and my head spinning, I half expected my mom to burst through the door, all worried eyes and apologetic hugs. She didn't. Neither did Dad. Olivia didn't even text. I went home that night with discharge papers and a new prescription, my stomach hollow not from hunger, but from the realization that no matter how bad things got, I could count on one thing: I was on my own. And here's where I have to pause. If you've ever been in that position where you're quietly dealing with something huge, and the people you thought would be your safety net are nowhere to be found, I want you to comment below, share your story. You might think you're alone, but you're not. At the time, I didn't know that being ignored in sickness was just a prelude to something worse. I thought I'd already been tested, but the real fracture was still coming, and when it hit, it wouldn't just break me, it would shatter any illusion I had left about my place in this family. It would start small, as these things often do. A decision made without me under the guise of what's best for everyone. A decision that would jeopardize my already fragile health just to keep Olivia comfortable. I didn't know it then, but that choice would become the point of no return. The moment that pushed me past the point of patience didn't come as a dramatic explosion. It came quietly, slipped into my life, like a splinter I didn't notice until it was buried deep under the skin. It was late spring, one of those weeks where my energy was measured in teaspoons. Every step felt like hauling a wet blanket up a hill, and yet I was still trying to keep some rhythm in my life. Doctor visits, short shifts at work, grocery runs in between flares. That week, my landlord called to say the building needed urgent maintenance in my apartment, something about a plumbing line that could burst if not fixed right away. It meant I'd have to stay somewhere else for a few days while they worked. Naturally, I thought of my parents' house. It wasn't far from my job, and they had a guest room. I called Mom, explained the situation, expecting at least a hint of concern about my health and how this disruption might affect me. Instead, she sighed like I'd just asked her to donate a kidney. "Well, honey, Olivia's home for the week. She's been feeling stressed lately, and we're letting her have the guest room so she can decompress." I blinked at the phone, waiting for the follow-up, but of course we'll figure something out for you. It didn't come. "So, where am I supposed to stay?" I asked slowly. "I'm sure you'll think of something." "You're resourceful," she said, her tone lifting on the last word like it was a compliment. "Besides, you know how Olivia gets when she doesn't have her space." That was it. No offer to shuffle things around. No acknowledgement that my illness made thinking of something a mountain to climb. I ended up dragging a suitcase to a budget motel on the edge of town. Thin walls, a flickering overhead light, and a bathroom that smelled faintly of mildew. Every trip up the narrow stairs made my legs shake, my lungs burning by the time I reached the door. My medications were lined up on the dresser, and I stared at them one night thinking, this isn't just about space. This is about my place in their lives. And the truth, I didn't have one. I kept replaying the conversation with Mom, wondering how she'd explain it to herself. Probably something like Olivia needed us more, or Emily can handle herself. Both were lies, they just preferred Olivia's comfort to my survival. That week in the motel gave me more than just insomnia, it gave me clarity. I thought back to the night in the hospital, to the ER visits, to the countless moments I'd been invisible, unless my absence inconvenienced them. It was a pattern so well worn, it could have been printed on our family crest. But here's the thing about being pushed to the edges: eventually, you stop trying to climb back to the center. You start looking for the exit. And maybe you felt this too, the moment you realize you've been auditioning for a role in someone else's life that you'll never get. If you've ever had that moment, let me know in the comments. Sometimes speaking it aloud is the first step in walking away. I didn't walk away right then. I told myself I'd wait until I was stronger, more stable, financially, maybe even healthier. But the truth was, I was afraid. Afraid that leaving would confirm what I'd tried to deny my whole life, that they wouldn't chase after me. What I didn't know was that the decision was going to be made for me sooner than I imagined, and not in a way that gave me time to prepare. One family event, one invitation that would reveal exactly where I stood was coming. And when it arrived, it wouldn't just be a test, it would be the final verdict. The day of Margot's funeral was gray in every possible way, sky heavy with cloud suits pressed, but joyless voices hushed not with grief, but calculation. I stood toward the back, avoiding the inner circle of executives who treated the event like another networking opportunity. They were masters of performance. The CEO delivered a eulogy so polished it could have been written by the PR team. Charles Bennett shook hands, spoke in soft tones, and tilted his head just enough to mimic sympathy. I recognized it all for what it was, posturing before the feeding frenzy. When the service ended, people drifted in small clusters toward their cars. That's when Charles appeared beside me like a shadow I didn't invite. His hand landed on my shoulder, the weight of it more claim than comfort. "Such a loss," he murmured. "We'll need to discuss transitioning her accounts soon." I kept my gaze on the damp grass at my feet. Whatever the company needs. The mask of grief on his face didn't reach his eyes. Those eyes were already calculating, flipping through spreadsheets in his mind, deciding who would get what from Margot's empire. That night after I got home, my phone buzzed. It was a text from the CEO meeting tomorrow. Bring complete client list. I stared at the message for a long time before typing a single word, understood. The next morning I handed him a printed list complete in their eyes but not in reality. 25 accounts in total, all legitimate, but none from the Pacific Coast portfolio. "Where are the Pacific accounts?" he asked, his tone carefully even. I tilted my head slightly, feigning confusion. "I'm not familiar with those. Margot handled them personally." His jaw tightened. "Search her files. We need those clients." "I'll get on it right away," I said, my voice smooth enough to skate on. And so began a week of theater. I rummaged through Margot's office, rifled through filing cabinets, checked drawers that I already knew were empty. I took notes, nodded gravely when asked for updates, and every evening I met with my actual clients, my clients, to reassure them. Most were still grieving in their own way. Many had worked with Margot for decades, but each one without fail expressed relief that they wouldn't have to start over with a stranger from the company. "Continuity is everything in business," one of them told me over coffee. "If they'd assigned someone else, I'd have walked." By Friday, the tension in the building was thick enough to taste. The executive team huddled in closed-door meetings, their expressions grim when they emerged. The forecast without the Pacific Coast accounts was ugly, and everyone knew it. That's when the inevitable happened. Charles called me into his office. The blinds were drawn this time, his jacket hanging on the back of his chair like he wanted to appear more casual. "We've made some decisions," he said. "Your role has been eliminated. You'll need to be out by end of day." I kept my face blank, even as a flicker of satisfaction sparked in my chest. This was exactly the moment Margot had prepared me for. At my desk, the HR-issued cardboard box waited again this time, not as a surprise but as a prop in the final act of their little drama. I began packing, slow and deliberate. My co-workers' eyes followed me, some sympathetic, some smug. Dana from finance approached, her voice low. "What are you going to do now?" I closed the box and met her gaze. "I have some ideas." If you've ever been underestimated only to have a plan, they'll never see coming, tell me in the comments. And if you're not already subscribed, you're going to want to be, because the next chapter, that's when I stopped playing defense. As I walked toward the elevator with my box, I passed Charles in the hallway. His smirk was subtle, but it was there. He thought this was the end for me. It wasn't. It was the point where the real game began. When Monday came, I didn't head to the office. Instead, I drove west away from the steel and glass headquarters past the sprawl of the suburbs until the air smelled faintly of salt and eucalyptus. This was where the Pacific Coast portfolio lived, hidden in plain sight, far from the reach of corporate vultures. I parked in front of a small cafe that Margot had loved. The owner, Mrs. Lang, spotted me through the window and waved me in. She brewed 2 cappuccinos before I even reached the counter. "I figured you might show up," she said. "Word gets around fast when someone like Charles starts circling." We sat in her favorite booth, the one by the bay window, sunlight spilling across the chipped formica table. I told her the truth, that the company had pushed me out, that I was free now to manage the accounts without interference. She leaned in, eyes sharp despite her years. "Margot said you'd know what to do. She told me, if I'm gone, trust Alex." Hearing my name like that spoken in Margot's voice in my memory was all the confirmation I needed. Over the next week, I crisscrossed the coast meeting with every client in the portfolio. They ranged from boutique vineyards perched on ocean cliffs to tech startups tucked in unmarked warehouses. Each meeting was personal face-to-face. I didn't talk about the company's implosion or the executives scrambling for scraps. I talked about stability, loyalty, and the promises Margot had made. And one by one, they signed with me directly. Back in the city, the corporate grapevine was buzzing. I could feel it through the text messages I ignored. "We heard you're poaching accounts. Charles is furious. Legal's asking questions." But I wasn't poaching anything. These clients weren't assets on a spreadsheet. They were relationships, and relationships belong to the people who earn them. On Thursday, as I was leaving a meeting with a coastal design firm, my phone rang. No caller ID. I answered. Alex Charles's voice came clipped and cold. "We need to talk." "I'm not interested." "You're violating your non-compete." "No, I'm not. You terminated me. And the clients approached me. I have every conversation documented. Want me to forward the emails?" Silence. "Then you're making a mistake." "Maybe, or maybe I'm just finishing something," Margot started. I hung up before he could respond. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, contracts spread out like a fan, each signature a small victory. My phone buzzed again, this time with a message from a name I didn't expect, Dana from finance. "If you're building something I want in." I stared at it for a long moment. This was bigger than survival now. It was about building something worth protecting, something that couldn't be taken away by people like Charles. I replied, "Let's talk tomorrow." If you've ever had to rebuild from the ground up and found it was better than what you lost, share your story below. And yes, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss how this story turns, when the tables finally turn all the way. The next morning, I met Dana at a quiet diner. She slid into the booth and pulled out a flash drive. "What's that?" I asked. "Proof," she said. "Charles has been shifting company funds into a side account. Margot suspected it before she passed, but I never had the evidence until now." I turned the drive over in my hand. This wasn't just a weapon, it was a lever. The kind that could move everything if I applied the right pressure. Dana smiled, the kind of smile that says, "I've been waiting for this too." And in that moment, I knew the next phase wasn't about defense anymore. It was time to take control of the board. By the time I left the diner, the weight of that flash drive in my pocket felt heavier than any box HR had ever handed me. I didn't go straight home. Instead, I drove aimlessly through the city, letting the skyline roll past while my mind worked through possibilities. That little piece of plastic wasn't just evidence, it was the key to flipping the game entirely. I stopped at a small public park by the river, one of those quiet spaces where the air smells like wet grass and the world slows down. Sitting on a bench, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. My finger hovered over the name of someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Michael Harrington, an investigative journalist who had once taken down a major real estate developer with nothing but a box of documents and stubborn persistence. I typed out a message, "Got something on corporate fraud. You'll want to see it." 2 hours later, we met in the back corner of a bookstore cafe. Michael still had the same sharp eyes, the same restless energy. I slid the flash drive across the table. "What's on it?" he asked. "Proof that Charles Bennett has been siphoning funds from his own company, and not small amounts, enough to trigger federal charges." He studied me for a moment. "Why bring this to me?" "Because you'll make it public. If I hand it to the board, they'll bury it. But if this story breaks wide open, Charles won't have a single place to hide." Michael nodded slowly. "Give me a week. I'll have to verify everything before I run it." "You'll have it in 3 days," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. The clock is ticking. Back at home, I sat at my kitchen table, replaying the meeting with Dana in my mind. She had risked her career to get me that drive. And if this went wrong, we'd both be in the crosshairs. The next morning, I met her again. We reviewed the paper trail transfers disguised as consulting fees, offshore accounts under shell companies, transactions timed right after quarterly reports. It was airtight. But exposing Charles wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure no one could do to someone else what they had tried to do to me. That night, Dana sent me a text board meeting next Friday. If the story breaks before then, it's over for him. I replied, "Then we don't miss the window." Have you ever held on to something that could change everything, but knew you had to time it just right? Tell me in the comments. And don't just watch from the sidelines, subscribe so you're here when the moment hits. On the third day, Michael called. His voice carried that restrained excitement reporters get when they're standing at the edge of a story with teeth. "It's all there," he said. "Every transfer, every shell account. I'm publishing Friday morning." "Make it early," I told him. "The board meets at 9. Thursday night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the chain reaction, how the article would drop, the phones would start ringing, and Charles's perfect image would fracture in real time. Friday, 6:00 a.m. My phone buzzed with a link. Headline in bold: Executive Embezzlement Scandal Rocks Bennett Financial. Michael's byline sat right beneath it. The story spread like wildfire. By the time the board assembled at 9, the damage was irreversible. Investors were calling for his resignation. Clients were demanding answers. And me, I was already 2 steps ahead. Because while Charles fought to keep his title, I was meeting with half his former clients, people who no longer wanted their money tied to a sinking ship. By noon, Dana texted me a single line: he's out. I leaned back in my chair, letting the reality settle. The man who had tried to erase me from the company had just been erased himself. But the board's panic meant the company's future was shaky, and the vacuum Charles left was one I had no interest in filling. I was building something better, something no one could take from me, and now I had every resource I needed to make it happen. The morning Charles was forced out, the building felt different, like the air had shifted. The security guards avoided eye contact, whispers floated down the hallways, and the elevator ride up to the 21st floor was pin-drop silent. Everyone knew, and everyone wanted to know what I would do next. I didn't go to my old office. I didn't even want it. Instead, I walked past the row of glass doors straight to the conference room where the senior team had gathered in a kind of stunned limbo. Dana was already there, flipping through a legal pad, eyes scanning me for the signal we'd discussed the night before. The acting CEO, a soft-spoken board member named Marlene, started the meeting with a brittle smile. We've all seen the news. The priority now is stability. Clients are nervous, the market is reacting, and stability won't save this company. I interrupted, my voice steady but cutting through the room like a blade. Transparency will, and it starts today. Heads turned. Some looked relieved, others cautious. I pulled out a folder and laid down copies of the same evidence that had taken Charles down. You're going to want to read these before the regulators do, because they're already on their way. The silence that followed was thick. Then one of the VPs spoke up, his voice low. If we cooperate fully, can we avoid federal oversight? I let the question hang for a moment. Maybe. But only if we stop pretending we didn't see this coming. You all knew something was off. You just didn't want to be the one to blow the whistle. Marlene cleared her throat. So what do you propose? That we cut ties with every shady contract, every offshore deal Charles engineered, and we make it public. A press release by tomorrow morning. And if the board can't stomach that, I'll go back to the press and tell them the rot goes deeper than one man. After the meeting, Dana caught up with me in the hallway. You're playing with fire, she said quietly. I'm building a firewall, I replied, one they can't burn through again. We stepped into the stairwell where no one could hear us. I told her my real plan. I wasn't just cleaning house, I was setting the stage for my exit. In a month, I'd be gone. But before that, I'd secure the relationships and contracts I'd need for my own firm. Her eyes widened. You're really doing it. I've been doing it since the day they locked me out of my office, I said. That afternoon, I started calling key clients, the ones who had sent quiet congratulations when the scandal broke. One by one, they told me the same thing: they'd lost faith in Bennett Financial. They wanted something new. Give me a few weeks, I told them, you'll have it. If you've ever been in a place that tried to break you and you found a way to turn it around, drop your story in the comments. I read them all. And if you're following this journey, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss what comes next. By the end of the week, the press release went out. It framed the company as entering a new era of integrity and client trust, which was PR spin for please don't pull your investments. But behind the scenes, I was watching the board scramble to plug the holes Charles had left and quietly preparing to walk out the door with a roster of high-value clients who believed in me, not the logo on the letterhead. Dana handled the internal audits, making sure my name was nowhere near any of the old mess. I meanwhile scheduled lunch meetings at quiet spots all over the city, sketching out what my own company could look like, leaner, smarter, unshackled, from the politics that had almost destroyed me. One night, sitting in my apartment with the city lights stretching out beyond the window, I felt that rare moment of clarity. This wasn't about beating Charles anymore. This was about building something he could never touch. And for the first time in months, I realized I wasn't just surviving. I was winning. The invitation arrived in a thick cream envelope, the kind you usually see for weddings or charity galas. No return address, no company letterhead, just my name written in looping, careful handwriting. Inside was a single card. Private reception, the Hanover Club. Thursday 8 p.m., attendance expected. I knew exactly what it meant. The Hanover Club wasn't the kind of place you just walked into, it was the inner sanctum of the city's power brokers. Bankers, political operatives, legacy billionaires. The kind of people who could ruin your career with a phone call or build it higher than you ever imagined. And if they were expecting me, it meant my moves these past weeks had caught their attention. Still, I wasn't sure if this was a welcome or a warning. I told Dana that afternoon, leaning against her office doorway. It's either the opening I've been waiting for, I said, or the trap that finally gets me. She swiveled in her chair, eyes narrowing. You think the board sent it? I shook my head. No, this is bigger. The board answers to them. Her expression hardened. Then you'd better be ready. If you go, you need to leave with more than a handshake. That was the thing. I wasn't planning to go empty-handed. I'd been piecing together a pitch for my new firm, but this could be the room to secure not just clients, but real backing. The kind of funding that would make my exit from Bennett Financial look like a hostile takeover, instead of a quiet resignation. Thursday came fast. I arrived in a tailored black suit, not flashy, but sharp enough to say I'm not here to be intimidated. The doorman glanced at the card, gave the barest nod, and ushered me inside. The Hanover Club was all dark wood oil paintings and low conversations. Crystal glasses caught the light from chandeliers older than the country itself. Every table seemed to hold some corner of influence: judges, media moguls, retired senators. A woman in her 60s, silver hair and a perfect chignon, approached with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Mr. Archer, she said smoothly, we've been watching you. It wasn't a compliment, it was a statement of fact. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. Within minutes, I was seated with 6 others, 3 men, 2 women, and 1 person, whose name I'd only seen in whispered emails. They'd heard about the shakeup at Bennett. They knew I'd played a role in bringing Charles down. We respect decisive action, one of them said, but we also value discretion. We need to know which side you're on. I leaned forward. I'm not on anyone's side. I'm building something of my own, and I suspect you don't invite people here unless you see value in that. A murmur went around the table. The silver-haired woman studied me. And what exactly are you building? That was my cue. I laid it out: the firm that would specialize in high-return ethical investments. A lean team insulated from the kind of rot that had infected Bennett. I spoke about trust, about transparency, but I also spoke their language: risk-reward, market dominance. When I finished, there was a pause. Then one of the men smiled faintly. Ambitious, dangerous. We like that, but we'll need assurances. Which are that you'll remember where your real loyalties lie. I knew what he meant. If I took their money, they'd expect influence, maybe even control. I didn't commit, not yet. Instead, I gave them just enough to keep the door open. Loyalty's a two-way street, I said. If you can guarantee mine, I can guarantee yours. The silver-haired woman's smile deepened. We'll be in touch. Walking out into the cold night air, I knew 2 things: I'd just been tested and I'd passed for now. But I'd also opened a door I might never be able to close. And that's when my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Careful, they don't invite you unless they already own you. I stared at the screen, the city lights blurring behind it. Whoever sent that knew exactly where I'd been. And they weren't wrong. This is where things start to twist. If you've been following, stay with me, because what happened after that message changed everything. I thought I knew about who was pulling the strings. I didn't sleep that night. The message kept replaying in my head like a bad song you can't turn off. They don't invite you unless they already own you. By morning, I'd convinced myself it had to be someone inside the Hanover Club, a dissenting voice, maybe even an ally. But how they had my personal number, I couldn't guess. Dana noticed the dark circles under my eyes when I walked into the office. You look like you spent the night wrestling with a ghost, she said, sliding a coffee across my desk. I took it and leaned back. Someone texted me after the Hanover meeting, warned me I might already be theirs. Her eyes sharpened. Do you believe it? I hesitated. Part of me does. Because here's the thing: they knew too much. My name, my moves, my intentions, and they didn't need me to confirm a damn thing. By noon, I had my first confirmation that the game had shifted. A courier delivered a manila envelope to my office, sealed with a wax crest I didn't recognize. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a list: names, dates, dollar amounts. People I knew from the financial world. People who had no business being connected. At the bottom, handwritten in black ink, pick a side before someone picks it for you. No signature, no explanation. I spent the rest of the day trying to trace the origins. The courier said the package was handed to him outside a coffee shop on the Upper West Side. Cash payment, no cameras nearby. When I showed Dana the list, she paled. Half these names have public reputations to protect. The other half are ghosts, off-the-grid wealth. And yet, I said they're tied together by something big. Maybe bigger than Hanover. She tapped the page. Which means if you go after this, you're in deeper than you realize. I didn't answer because she was right. That evening, my phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. This time, it was a single line. You're not the only one they've recruited. Before I could reply, a second text came through with an address and time: Saturday, 3 p.m. The place, a small, unassuming diner in Queens. I debated for hours whether to go. It could be a setup. But the part of me that had survived Bennett Financial knew that information was the only currency worth risking everything for. Saturday came and I went. The diner was half empty. The smell of frying onions hung heavy in the air. A woman in a faded leather jacket sat in the back booth, her hair pulled into a loose bun. She looked mid-30s, sharp eyes scanning every corner. When I slid into the seat across from her, she didn't waste time. I was you. 2 years ago, same invite, same promises. I studied her face, and now... She gave a bitter laugh. Now I'm in hiding. Hanover doesn't invest, they absorb. They give you power, sure, but only enough to make you dependent. When you try to walk, they burn you down. She slid a flash drive across the table. Everything I've gathered. Names, deals, leverage points. But you didn't get it from me. If they trace this back, we're both done. Why me, I asked. Because you're still clean. And because I heard what you did to Charles Bennett. Hanover likes winners, but they hate wild cards. I pocketed the drive, heart pounding. As I stood to leave, she gripped my wrist. Open it somewhere safe. And when you do, decide if you want to burn them or join them. Her eyes were steady, but there was something else there, fear. That night, I didn't go home. I booked a cheap motel room on the outskirts of the city, the kind of place where nobody asks your name. Sitting on the creaky bed, I plugged the drive into my laptop. Files spilled across the screen: contracts, offshore accounts, hidden mergers. And then I saw it, my own name listed under pending acquisition. They weren't waiting to see if I'd join. They'd already started the process. And right there, staring at that file, I knew 2 things. First, that walking away was no longer an option. Second, that if I didn't turn the tables fast, they'd own me in ways I couldn't even imagine. This is where the real war begins. Stay close, because the move I made next wasn't just a gamble. It was the kind of play that could either free me or finish me for good. The motel room was dim lit only by the glow of my laptop screen. The file with my name under pending acquisition seemed to pulse as if it were alive, breathing down my neck. I sat there numb until the reality started clawing its way in. They weren't offering me a choice. They were writing my future for me. I closed the file, powered down the laptop, and paced. My brain churned through every move I'd made since Hanover had entered my life. Who had I spoken to? What had I signed? What casual remark might have been twisted into consent? There was a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. It was late, too late for housekeeping, too early for trouble to knock politely. I approached, slowly peering through the peephole. Dana. I yanked the door open and pulled her inside. How did you find me? You think I don't track your burner phones? She said, voice tight. You disappeared after the meeting. I figured you were either in a ditch or on the verge of making a terrible decision. I handed her the flash drive. You need to see this. We sat on the bed side by side, the springs squeaking under our weight as I booted up the laptop again. She scrolled through the files, her face hardening with every click. This isn't just Hanover, she whispered. They're plugged into a network that runs deeper offshore accounts, shadow companies, political funding. This is a map of influence, and you're smack in the middle of it. Her finger stopped on one document. Wait. This one's dated last week. It's an acquisition agreement, but for you. They're framing it like you're a business asset. That's because to them I am, I said. Once they acquire me, they own my contracts, my leverage, even my silence. Dana looked at me with an intensity that bordered on panic. You need to destroy this. Walk away. And let them win, I shook my head. No. If I run, they'll just find another way to pull me back in. The only way out is through. She exhaled sharply. Then you're going to need allies. Real ones. I thought about the woman from the diner, her warning, her fear. Maybe she'd already burned every bridge, but if she'd survived this long, she knew something I didn't. The next morning, I called the number from the text. No answer. Just a voicemail greeting that was nothing but static. Still, I left a message. If you want Hanover burned to the ground, meet me at Pier 14 tonight, 9 p.m. Pier 14 was an old freight dock, long abandoned, where the city lights didn't quite reach. It was the kind of place deals happened in whispers, or bodies disappeared. When I arrived, the air was sharp with salt and rust. Footsteps echoed on the planks before she emerged from the shadows. "You're either brave or stupid," she said. Sometimes I replied it's the same thing. I laid it out for her, the file with my name, the network we were both up against. Her jaw tightened. "Then you're already inside the machine. And once you're in, there's only one way to get out. Which is, you have to become more dangerous than they are." She pulled a small leather-bound notebook from her jacket and flipped to a page. "Here. These are the choke points, key assets they can't afford to lose. Hit them and you make Hanover bleed." It was risky, suicidal maybe, but the thought of letting them script my life like a line item on a balance sheet was worse. Back at the motel, Dana and I pored over the notebook. Each choke point was a name, a location, a pressure point. One of them stood out: a private server farm in upstate New York, supposedly holding decades of Hanover's internal records. "That's the artery," Dana said. "Cut it and their network flatlines." "But it's guarded," I countered. "Security, legal barriers, probably physical ones too." "Then we don't go through the front door," she said. "We go through the back." For the first time in days, I felt the faint spark of control. This wasn't just survival anymore, it was strategy. I leaned back, looking at Dana. "We do this right, we don't just escape. We burn their playbook. And when we do," I let the sentence hang, the weight of it filling the room. "Because sometimes the only way to take your freedom back is to steal it right from under their hands." And I was done waiting for permission. The plan wasn't born in a moment of brilliance. It was hammered together in the gritty hours before dawn, pieced out on motel stationery and half-empty coffee cups. Dana and I worked in near silence, the only sounds the scratch of pens and the occasional sigh when a roadblock appeared in our logic. The server farm wasn't just a data center. It was Hanover's heartbeat, and if we struck there, we'd either kill them or provoke them into burning us alive. We split the approach into 3 phases. Phase 1, infiltration. We couldn't waltz in. The place had biometric locks, security patrols, and a gatehouse that logged every plate number. Dana had a contact, Eli, a former systems engineer who'd been fired after a whistleblowing attempt. He knew the layout, and more importantly, he knew which vendors had backdoor access. Phase 2, extraction. We weren't just deleting files, we were pulling evidence. That meant bypassing their internal audit triggers, so the system wouldn't scream the moment we touched a drive. Dana swore she could ghost into their servers without tripping a single alarm. I didn't doubt her. She had a way of making machines bend to her will. Phase 3, cover and escape. This was the most fragile. Once the data was in our hands, Hanover would know. They'd trace every shadow until they found us. We needed a safe house and multiple burn routes. The woman from Pier 14 who finally introduced herself as Marin offered one. If things go sideways, she told me, don't call. Just show up. Leave everything else behind. On paper, it almost looked doable. But in my gut, I knew plans like this only worked until the first punch landed. That evening, we drove north. The motel in Albany, where we checked in, was cleaner, but it carried the same transient air rooms for people passing through, not people who wanted to be remembered. Dana set up her gear on the small desk cables snaking across the carpet. She'd spoofed an employee badge using a grainy LinkedIn photo and some template software that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. Tomorrow, she said, we get our hands on their blood. I didn't sleep much. Instead, I kept running over the conversation I'd had with Marin before we left the dock. She'd told me that Hanover didn't just control assets, they controlled narratives. If they decide you're a villain, she'd said, every headline will agree. The truth won't matter. It made me think about the people who'd vanished from my life contacts, who stopped returning calls, former colleagues who'd cut me off without explanation. Maybe Hanover had already started writing my obituary in the court of public opinion. The morning came gray and cold. Eli met us at a diner 2 towns over, nursing a black coffee and looking like he'd slept in his truck. You've got a 2-hour window, he said. Delivery crew drops off replacement server racks at 10. You slip in with them, claim you're there to recalibrate the load balancers, and you'll have access to the primary network room. What about cameras? Dana asked. They're on a rotating feed, 20-second blind spots every 3 minutes. Don't stay still long enough to be noticed. He slid an access card across the table. This will get you past the secondary doors. The rest is on you. By the time we pulled up near the facility, my pulse was a steady drum. The building was all steel and tinted glass, set back from the road with a perimeter fence topped in razor wire. A light snow had started to fall, softening the edges of the scene, but not the danger. The delivery truck arrived right on time, and we merged with the crew hard hats, reflective vests, clipboards. No one questioned us. Inside, the air was cool and dry, humming with the constant vibration of servers at work. Dana and I moved fast, slipping into the network room, while the crew unloaded crates. She knelt by the main rack, her fingers flying across a portable console. Lines of code scrolled past green on black. "We're in," she murmured. 10 minutes. I kept watch, my eyes darting to the hallway beyond the glass wall. A guard walked past, glanced in, then kept moving. I exhaled slowly. Dana pulled the first drive and slipped it into a shielded case. Then another. By the time she got to the third, a light on the far wall flickered red. "Talk to me," I hissed. "Tripwire," she said through gritted teeth. "I can stall it, but not for long." "How long?" 3 minutes, maybe less. We grabbed what we could and slid the drives into my vest pockets. Dana shut down her console, and we walked out like we belonged there. Past the loading bay, past the gatehouse, into the biting air of the parking lot. Once inside the rental car, I dared to breathe. Dana smiled faintly. Phase 2 complete. But my phone buzzed in my pocket. An unknown number. One line of text. "You've got something that isn't yours." We didn't speak for the first 10 miles. The road out of town wound through bare winter trees, the sky a heavy slab of gray above us. My phone lay face down in the cup holder, that single message burning in my mind like a lit fuse. Dana finally broke the silence. "They know. It wasn't a question." I nodded. "They probably knew the second we touched that third drive." She tightened her grip on the steering wheel. "We stick to the plan. No deviations." But the truth? The plan had already started to crumble. The tripwire meant Hanover's system was probably logging every move we made from the moment it detected us. If they were fast enough, they could lock down roads, hit our bank accounts, even trigger false warrants. We pulled off at a gas station near a stretch of frozen farmland. While Dana fueled up, I went inside to grab coffee and snacks for the road. The man behind the counter barely looked at me until he did. "You folks driving the silver sedan?" he asked casually. I froze. "Why?" "Just saw a guy hanging around it. Didn't look like he was buying gas." I walked out quickly, scanning the lot. A man in a dark coat stood near our car, pretending to scroll on his phone. He glanced up, and our eyes locked. There was nothing casual about the way he moved toward me. Inside, Dana barked from the other side of the car. She'd seen him too. We both slid in, doors slamming, and peeled out before he could close the gap. By the time we hit the highway, Dana was muttering under her breath, cycling through possible tail routes. "They've got people on us already. That means they've skipped subtlety." Which means I asked. Which means they don't care who sees what happens next. We decided to abandon the silver sedan 2 towns over. A used car lot sat just off the interstate, the kind of place with handwritten signs taped to windshields, and a man in a puffy jacket pacing with a cell phone. We traded in for a dusty green pickup, paid in cash, and didn't bother with pleasantries. As we merged back onto the highway, Dana reached into her bag and pulled out one of the drives. "We need to see what's on here before we risk handing it over to anyone. For all we know, we just stole their grocery list." I agreed. We took the next exit into a small industrial park and found a half-abandoned office complex. Inside one of the empty suites, Dana set up her portable rig again. The data wasn't organized. It was a raw dump of internal correspondence, financial ledgers, and encrypted project files. But even without decryption, some file names spoke volumes: acquisition leverage, strategy, .docx regulatory, capture, ochplan.pptx, contingency, evacuation, USA sets.pdf. Then there were the video's surveillance feeds, showing meetings between Hanover execs and public officials, some of whom I recognized from the news. One clip froze me entirely, a man I'd once trusted shaking hands with Hanover's CEO, exchanging a slim envelope. "This is enough to ruin them," Dana whispered. Before we could say more, the hum of an engine echoed from outside. Dana killed the screen. We crept to the window. A black SUV idled in the lot, its windows too dark to see through. "They found us," I said. Dana grabbed the drives, shoved them into her bag. "We're not going through the front." She pointed toward the back hall, where an emergency exit led into an alley choked with snowdrifts. We moved fast, boots crunching on ice, the sound masked by the growl of the SUV's engine. Behind us, the office door slammed open. Footsteps, voices. The alley spilled into a narrow service road. Dana spotted a chain-link fence with a padlock half rusted through. She kicked at it once, twice, and it gave way. We slipped through just as shouts erupted behind us. The pickup was parked 3 blocks away under the skeletal branches of an old oak. We ran without speaking, every breath clouding in the cold air. By the time we slammed the door shut, the SUV was still nowhere in sight. Dana gunned the engine, and we were back on the road heading nowhere in particular. That's when she said it. We can't keep running like this. We need to get the drives to Marin before Hanover figures out where she is. I hesitated. And if they've already found her? She didn't answer. The silence between us was heavier than the snow-laden clouds above. Somewhere behind, on some unseen road, I imagined the SUV sliding into our trail again. And I realized we weren't just in the middle of the storm anymore. We were dragging it with us. By the time we crossed into the next county, the sky had dimmed into that bruised purple that comes just before nightfall. The wipers squeaked across the windshield, brushing away a light flurry of snow. Neither of us had spoken in nearly half an hour. Marin was our only shot. She'd been Hanover's head of compliance before she turned whistleblower, vanishing with a trove of evidence no one had ever seen. She knew the internal network, the people, the leverage points. If anyone could use these drives without getting themselves killed, it was her. But finding her meant threading a needle while the hands holding it were shaking. Dana broke the silence first. She's in a safe house near Ridgeport. Not the one you've heard about, the other one. No neighbors, no mail service. If Hanover even suspects, they'll burn it to the ground, I finished. She nodded. Exactly, which is why we can't just show up. We'll make a drop, neutral location. She'll know how to retrieve it. We pulled into a diner that looked like it had been stranded on the side of the highway since the 70s. Neon buzzed faintly in the windows. Inside, it smelled of coffee fryer oil and something sweet baking in the back. We sat in a corner booth, backs to the wall. Dana took out one of the drives, slipping it into a small fireproof pouch. We leave this in the storage locker at mile marker 218. Key goes in the dead drop behind the Ridgeport post office. I looked around the diner. The truckers at the counter, the waitress topping off mugs, the hum of the refrigeration units, it all felt almost normal. And that more than anything made me uneasy. Halfway through a plate of pie, I noticed a man at the far end of the counter staring just a little too long. When I met his eyes, he smiled, too slow, too deliberate. My stomach tightened. Time to go, I whispered. Dana didn't ask why. She tossed cash on the table and we stepped out into the cold. I could feel the man's gaze following us through the glass. We drove without headlights for the first mile, letting the darkness swallow us. When the mile marker finally appeared in the dim glow of the dash, Dana slowed and pulled onto a narrow maintenance road. At the end sat a row of storage units, paint-peeling locks crusted with rust. The code from Marin's old contact worked. Inside the unit we found nothing but dust and the smell of metal. Dana placed the pouch in an empty paint can, sealed it, and tucked it behind a stack of rotting pallets. "That's it?" I asked. "That's it," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Back on the highway, the tension didn't lift. If anything, it grew heavier. The dead drop was next, and Ridgeport was still 30 miles away. Somewhere near the halfway mark, headlights appeared behind us, just a single pair, steady, unblinking. Dana's hands tightened on the wheel. "That's them. How can you be sure? They haven't passed us, haven't fallen back, just there." She took the next exit, winding through side streets, lit by the occasional flicker of a porch light. The headlights followed. In a sudden move, she swerved into an alley and killed the engine. We sat in absolute darkness. A moment later, the headlights rolled past the mouth of the alley and didn't stop. We waited another 5 minutes before moving again. The Ridgeport post office sat in a block of brick buildings, all closed for the night. Behind it, the dead drop was nothing more than a loose brick in a low wall. Dana slipped the key inside, pressing the brick back into place. "Done," she said. We walked back to the truck in silence. For the first time all day, I let myself think maybe, just maybe, we'd pulled it off. Then as we pulled onto the main road, my phone lit up with a single text from an unknown number. "Nice try." Dana saw it, her jaw clenched. "They know about the drop." The road ahead seemed to stretch forever, black and empty. But somewhere in that darkness, Hanover was already moving toward Marin and toward us. The next morning, the air in Ridgeport was brittle with cold. Frost webbed across the motel's windows, and the sky outside glowed a pale silver. I hadn't slept. Every sound in the parking lot, the cough of an engine, the slam of a car door, had me expecting Hanover's people to come kicking through. Dana was already dressed when I emerged from the bathroom. We can't wait for Maren to find the drop, she said. If they know about it, she's in danger now. I rubbed my eyes. Then what, we track her down ourselves? That's the only way, she replied, tightening her coat zipper. We force the meeting, get the evidence in her hands, and vanish. Ridgeport's streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you check over your shoulder. Dana drove with the ease of someone mapping exit routes with every turn. She guided us toward the old industrial district where Maren's safe house was rumored to be hidden among abandoned warehouses. The closer we got, the more it felt like walking into a chess game already in motion, every piece set, every move anticipated. We spotted the black SUV before we even reached the block. Two men sat inside their heads, turning just slightly as we passed. Dana didn't flinch. She kept driving, looping around to approach from the other side. The warehouse we stopped at looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Rust streaked the corrugated metal and weeds clawed through cracks in the pavement. Dana parked in the shadow of a neighboring building. Stay here, she told me, but I shook my head. No chance. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust motes floated in beams of light cutting through broken windows. Then from the far corner, a voice. You're late. Maren stepped out from behind a stack of crates, hair tucked under a knit cap, eyes sharp. She looked smaller than I'd imagined, but every inch of her radiated control. Dana wasted no time. She handed over the pouch. Hanover knows, she said. Maren's gaze flicked between us. Then they'll be here soon. A crash echoed from outside, the sound of a vehicle door slamming hard. Maren moved fast, tucking the pouch into her jacket. Follow me. We wound through a maze of corridors, the footsteps of Hanover's men closing in. Maren led us to a narrow staircase down into a basement that smelled faintly of oil and damp concrete. She pushed open a metal hatch that led into an old storm drain. This runs out under the canal, she said. Go, now. We splashed through ankle-deep water, the echoes of shouts chasing us. The tunnel twisted, turned, and finally spat us out onto the frozen edge of the canal. Across the water, a black van waited, engine idling, driver's door open. That's mine, Maren said. Get in. Once inside the heater, blasting warm air, Maren laid it out. This is bigger than you think. Hanover isn't just laundering money. They're moving people, blackmailing officials, controlling elections. The drives you brought are the key, but exposing them means taking down half the power structure in this state. Dana stared out the window. So what do? Maren smiled grimly. We burn them. All of them. And we don't stop until there's nothing left for them to rebuild from. The van rolled onto the highway, the city shrinking behind us. I looked over at Dana, her eyes met mine. And for the first time in days, there was something like hope there. The road ahead was uncertain, dangerous, maybe even suicidal, but it was ours. And if you've been with me this far, you know this isn't just my story. It's a reminder that sometimes the only way to protect your freedom is to fight for it, no matter the cost. If you want to hear what happened when we finally took Hanover apart piece by piece, stick around for my next video. You won't believe who turned on us in the final hours. When it was finally over, the winter in Ridgeport gave way to a cautious spring. The news stations talked in hushed tones about unprecedented corruption charges and systemic collapse, but they never said our names. That was how we wanted it. Dana and I rented a small cabin on the edge of a lake 2 states over. In the mornings, mist curled over the water and loons called from the far shore. We'd sit on the porch with mugs of coffee, watching the sun lift itself slowly into the sky. The tension that had wound so tight in my chest for months began to unspool. Dana laughed more. I started sleeping through the night again. We didn't talk much about Hanover, Maren, or the nights we'd spent running. But sometimes in the quiet, our eyes would meet, and the unspoken truth would pass between us. We had done something dangerous, something necessary. One afternoon, while stacking firewood, Dana said, "You know, if we hadn't made that choice, none of this," she gestured at the lake, the trees, the peace would have been possible. I thought about that for a long time. It's easy to imagine that freedom is something given to you, a birthright, a constant. But the truth is, it's something you hold on to with both hands, even when the wind tries to tear it away. We had fought for ours. And now, in this small, quiet corner of the world, we could finally breathe. If you've ever been backed into a corner feeling like every door is locked, remember there's always another way through. You just have to be willing to take it, no matter how dark the path looks at first. And with that, we let the lake and the sky be our witnesses, turning the page to a life we'd chosen for ourselves.